20,000 years ago, winter didn't mean a jacket and a warm drink. It meant a countdown. Temperatures plunged to levels the human body was never designed to survive. No heating, no stored food waiting in a pantry, no walls thick enough to stop wind that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. And yet somehow, we made it. Not comfortably, not gently. Our ancestors survived the Ice Age through decisions that would horrify most people alive today. Decisions about food, about shelter, about who got to eat first and who didn't. This is the story of how the human species almost didn't make it through winter, and the choices that made sure, eventually, we did. The central question. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. For roughly 100,000 years, much of the northern hemisphere sat locked inside an ice age. Glaciers a mile thick covered land that today holds cities like Chicago and Berlin. Average temperatures were 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit colder than now. A modern human dropped into that world with nothing but bare skin would die of hypothermia in under 3 hours. So how did a species with no fur, no claws, and no natural defense against cold not just survive but spread across the entire frozen world? The answer isn't inspiring in the way we'd like it to be. It's something closer to brutal ingenuity, and it starts with a decision most people never think about. The first survival tool wasn't fire, it was a corpse. Picture a hunting group in what is now Siberia 24,000 years ago. A mammoth has just died, maybe from age, maybe from the cold itself. Within hours, the group descends on it, not just for meat. They strip the hide, they crack the bones, and in some documented archaeological sites, like the famous settlement at Mezherich in Ukraine, entire homes were built from mammoth bones, skulls stacked as foundations, tusks curved into door frames, hides stretched across the top as insulation. Archaeologists uncovered these bone dwellings in the 1960s, and what they found stunned them. This wasn't a temporary shelter, it was engineering, load-bearing structures made almost entirely from the skeleton of an animal that weighed more than a modern SUV. But that wasn't the strangest part. To survive winter, these groups sometimes had to make a colder calculation. An injured or dying group member could no longer keep pace with a nomadic band chasing migrating herds, and in the harshest recorded winters, anthropological evidence suggests some groups faced an impossible choice: leave the weak behind or risk the survival of everyone. We don't like this part of the story, but historians studying subsistence-level survival from the Arctic to the Andes keep finding the same pattern. Extreme scarcity forces extreme choices. It isn't cruelty, it's arithmetic. What fire actually bought us? Fire feels like an obvious answer. Of course they used fire. But here's what most documentaries skip. Fire in the Ice Age wasn't a comfort. It was a full-time job. Keeping a flame alive through a Siberian winter meant someone was always awake. Wood was often scarce this far north, so groups burned bone and fat instead. Animal grease packed with enough energy to burn for hours, filling shelters with thick black smoke that scientists studying ancient hearths still find embedded in cave ceilings today. A 2016 study analyzing hearths at Ice Age sites in Ukraine found that fires weren't constant. They were rationed, precisely timed. Every log, every bone, every scrap of fat was inventoried. Nothing was wasted because nothing could be replaced. This is where something remarkable happened. Fire didn't just provide warmth, it reorganized the entire structure of human life. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham argues that cooking, made possible by controlled fire, allowed early humans to extract far more calories from food than eating it raw. In a world where every calorie mattered for survival, this wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between a population that grew and one that quietly disappeared. The clothing that shouldn't have worked. Here's something almost nobody knows. Neanderthals, despite living in Ice Age Europe for over 200,000 years, appear to have worn minimal cape-like clothing, draped hides, not fitted garments. Modern humans, arriving later, did something different. They invented the needle. Eyed sewing needles made from bone dating back roughly 40,000 years allowed Homo sapiens to create tailored, layered clothing, fitted pants, sealed boots, hooded coats stitched tight against wind. Some researchers, including archaeologist Ian Gilligan, argue this single invention may explain why modern humans thrived in conditions that pushed Neanderthals toward extinction. Not stronger muscles, not thicker skin, a needle. Think about that. The difference between surviving an ice age and disappearing from the fossil record may have come down to who figured out how to sew. The psychological cost nobody talks about. Survival wasn't just physical, it was psychological warfare against isolation and darkness. In the far north, winter didn't just bring cold, it brought months of near-total darkness. Modern researchers studying seasonal depression in Arctic communities today still document spikes in anxiety, sleep disruption, and despair during these long, sunless stretches. Now imagine experiencing that with no electric light, no stored entertainment, no certainty that spring was even coming. Anthropologist Richard Lee, studying hunter-gatherer societies in the 20th century, found something surprising. These groups often spent less time working for survival than modern humans spend at their jobs, but winter scarcity periods were the brutal exception. Storytelling, ritual, and tight social bonds weren't just culture, they were survival infrastructure. A tribe that stayed emotionally bonded through the darkest months was a tribe more likely to cooperate when food ran low, and cooperation, not individual strength, is what kept groups alive. Unlike us, they had no privacy to retreat into. Everyone's survival was tied to everyone else's. Maybe that's the part we've lost. The bodies that adapted. Here's where the story gets stranger. Survival wasn't just behavioral, it was biological. Populations that endured generations of extreme cold show measurable physical adaptations. Researchers studying Arctic-adapted populations like the Inuit have found genetic variants tied to fat metabolism and heat regulation, traits that trace back tens of thousands of years to ancestors who lived through similarly brutal winters. Some researchers even point to shorter limb-to-torso ratios in cold-adapted ancient populations, a pattern known as Bergmann's and Allen's rules, the same principle that gives Arctic foxes shorter ears than desert foxes. Less surface area, less heat lost. Evolution wasn't rushing to make us comfortable, it was rushing to make sure enough of us survived to have children. What happened when it wasn't enough? Not every group made it. The fossil and genetic record is full of dead ends, populations that thrived for thousands of years and then simply vanish from the archaeological timeline. Some Neanderthal populations in Ice Age Europe show signs of nutritional stress in their final millennia, isolated, spread thin, unable to adapt fast enough as the cold intensified. Researchers weren't expecting this, but genetic studies suggest modern humans and Neanderthals interbred during this period, meaning even as one lineage faded, its genes quietly persisted inside the survivors. In a strange way, the ones who lost the Ice Age are still inside us. Most people with European or Asian ancestry carry Neanderthal DNA today, most of it linked to immune function, and interestingly, traits related to skin and hair, cold weather adaptations inherited from a species that didn't make it but left something behind anyway. Final reflection. We tell ourselves progress means we've left our ancestors behind, but the instincts that kept a Paleolithic family alive through a brutal winter, the pull toward community, the hoarding instinct when resources feel scarce, the deep unease we still feel in prolonged darkness, those didn't disappear, they just went quiet, buried under central heating and grocery stores and streetlights. Our ancestors didn't survive the Ice Age because they were fearless, they survived because they were relentlessly, resourcefully practical, willing to make choices we'd rather not imagine in order to make sure someone made it to spring. Maybe progress didn't erase who we are, it simply buried it. And somewhere underneath all of it, we're still the same species that once built a house out of a mammoth just to make it through one more winter.